Well, hello and welcome everyone joining us today. And we're so pleased and honored to have with us Mary Nichols, the chair of the California Air Resources Board, long-running chair, and so many milestones under your tenure, Mary. So thank you, first of all, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
We want to really talk about this exciting announcement with the 15-state Memorandum of Understanding around zero-emission trucks and buses, and the powerful goal there. The governor recently talked about this really magnifying California's efforts to reduce emissions and improve air quality, build this market. How powerful a message do you view this, coming off the heels of ACT and then 15 more states essentially adopting your same goal?
It's terrific, of course. You know, these things don't happen by chance, or at least not in my experience, they don't. We had been talking to NESCAUM and to individual states for quite a long time now about this effort and keeping them apprised of what we were doing. And the states had come together and actually done most of the work of developing the MOU, conferring with us, but this is basically driven by them. And when we got around to actually bringing the ACT rule in front of the board and then took the final action on it, we thought about what was the best way to reveal this new development. And I think everybody felt like it deserved a day of its own, and to not just kind of get folded into the story on the board action. So by waiting a little bit, we were able to roll it out with you know, the signatures of all the governors and the coordinated press releases and all of that. And I think it made a big difference in terms of how the message got received. So this is not just about, you know, strategy in terms of press, but also strategy of really giving everybody who's involved in this thing, all of our stakeholders, the sense that this is something that's bigger than just California now.
It is, and it's 40% of really the population of this nation. That is a huge market signal.
Yes, it is. And it's particularly important, I think, for the heavy-duty vehicles because, as has often been pointed out to us, the decisions that are made about what to buy and the whole role of the heavy-duty engines is very different in our economy. These are not impulse consumer choices that are made. These are really basic inputs to the economy, and the businesses that are going to be buying these, or the cities, or the state for that matter, have very specific needs for these vehicles. And so it's important that we be able to proceed in a way that shows that we can and do take account of the economic impacts, and at the same time that part of that is understanding that dealing with air pollution and climate change is now fundamental to everybody's business.
Great, Mary, thank you. We understand that NESCAUM is going to be using the original ZEV task force to really help develop this action plan. Wanted to understand how you see California playing a role in the task force, and what type of policies and strategies would you like to see in this plan?
Well, first of all, we will be full members of the task force, and I expect that just given the size of our state, our market, as well as our depth of the bench that we have in our program, that we will be a key player in the task force. But we also understand that each state has its own unique structures for decision making, and that even though the NESCAUM states have a lot of history of working together as a region, they do all have their own separate legislatures and budgets, etc. So it's never possible to do one agreement that covers absolutely everything. I think the thing that makes this exciting, though, and what we really are hoping to see, is a much more effective plan for market support for these vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
In the past, the manufacturers, this is more true on the light duty side, I guess, but you know, they would go from state to state and they would say, well, you can't have a ZEV mandate, or your state isn't a good place for us to sell electric vehicles because ... And it had to do with the Public Utilities Commission's regulations on charging and about the, you know, the weather conditions and the road maintenance and whether there were subsidies or not. And, you know, to the extent that we can all share information about these things, talk about best practices, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and if at all possible, you know, work regionally on things, I think it'll make a big difference in terms of overcoming some of the obstacles that we've faced in the past.
One of the things that you hear from manufacturers, and I know you heard a lot of this leading up to ACT, and you have on other regulations, is, well, California, yes, you're a big market, but you know, you're only a certain percentage of the market. I think the certainty that comes from 40% of the national market is a pretty big signal. Are you hearing any private feedback on that, that this gives a lot more certainty to manufacturers to be able to not just achieve California's rule, but really invest and lean into this space?
What we have heard is that there's a recognition now that this is real, that ACT is moving forward, regardless of what happens in the November election, et cetera, that people understand, people in the industry understand that with this many states having really signed up, that it means that it will happen. There may be bumps along the road from time to time, but I don't think there's going to be any fundamental turning back at this point.
And no inkling from the Trump administration that they may challenge the ability to do ACT at this point?
No, you know, ACT is solidly grounded in the Clean Air Act authority and the 177 section states authority to take steps that are needed to deal with their air pollution problems. So we're out of the ideological realm of debate about climate change, even though the rule certainly has climate benefits as well. But we're grounded in the public health and the Clean Air Act, and I think we're on very solid ground there.
How can the advanced clean truck rule be a model for the global community? And wondering how CalStart's Global Drive to Zero, how can we help expand the extent of its impact and the benefits that it can bring to other countries?
First of all, I think just spreading the word. I know that, you know, there's an underground network and an overground network of information out there. But when you are talking to the countries and to the agencies that you all talk to, I think they often have detailed, specific questions about what the rule actually is and when and how it takes effect. And in particular, as I know you're going to want to talk to me in a few minutes about what's coming next in terms of NOx and fleet rules. So, yeah, having a greater awareness out there among the professionals in this field of what the philosophy is here and the overall action plan, which is something I think, you know, your organization is uniquely well qualified to play a part in. So we hope and expect that you will be key partners in this.
And we pledge to do that, and already have started to launch some of those conversations and taking, if you will, a roadshow out to share the news on it. Getting back to California, Mary, because we talked about this as we led into this a little bit. ACT is the first act of a larger package that you're taking forward at the board. Pretty aggressive steps, an omnibus approach. Can you tell us what's next for ACT, for the low NOx rule, for an aggressive fleet rule? What should we expect, and what's the timing?
Sure. Well, the final action on ACT is done, which means it's now in effect, and people are starting to figure out their compliance plans if they hadn't already. And I know many companies were already well aware of what was coming and have started making their plans. The next step is the omnibus NOx rule, which relates to all kinds of engines that use diesel or any other kind of liquid fuel, because we do expect those vehicles are going to be with us for years to come. And as fast as we can go in turning over to zero, we still need everybody else to be doing what can be done with technology. And there's a lot that can be done with technology to reduce overall emissions. So that comes before the board for its initial hearing, and that may be it, or there may be further changes in August. And then early next year, I can't give a date at this point, but it will be shortly after the first of the year. The board will be considering the fleet rule, which has been under development for quite some time, but is more complicated in part because data that we will be getting from the ACT rule is going to be part of what we look at when we come up with the final numbers for which types of fleets are going to be given what types of targets for purchases of zero emission vehicles. So it is a multi-step effort, all moving in the same direction in terms of driving emissions down as fast and effectively as we can. And it's really based on what we've learned over the years, many years that California has been in the business of regulating vehicles and fleets, is that we think we have a comprehensive approach here, which will work better for both the environment and for the regulated industry.
Hey, one last observation, and I wanted to get your thoughts on this, because you have seen so much happen over the last many years. We seem to be at an interesting inflection point. For technology, there is really the capability to do now what California needs done, not just in reducing emissions in combustion engines, but now going to full zero emissions. At the same time, there's this real understanding of equity issues, of environmental racism, and a variety of other issues that mean cleaning up our urban regions, and particularly those regions most impacted by transportation pollution, is more critical than ever, and the demand is there for it. Does that actually help people adopt this rule? Is that why we saw maybe more states than we originally maybe anticipated leaning into the MOU, because they realize we've got to start taking care of this? We've got real demands in our community for it.
Yes, I think the recognition that has come about pretty dramatically this summer, long overdue, that there are parts of our states, parts of our cities that have been left behind in the general movement towards cleaner air, where there are pockets, and these are not just tiny little pockets, they're whole areas of major cities where people are getting exposures that are much greater than you might think if you just looked at the national numbers on meeting the federal clean air standards. Part of this is, of course, the fact that diesel pollution is not just an air quality smog issue, or smog and particles. It's also a major source of toxic air contaminants. And so where you have a community where people's health is being threatened, and you didn't mention it, but we're having this interview and living through a time where we're all isolated in our homes and offices, home offices, you know, communicating electronically because we can't be meeting together in a studio or a common place, and that's because of a virus which has been particularly devastating in our poor communities of color. And these are the people that are not only being most impacted by the virus, but they're also the people who are subjected to the worst pollution. And at the heart of it all is our transportation sector. Transportation system, and the fact that we are so dependent on diesel vehicles to run our entire economy. So this is something that air regulators have noticed, and legislators and governors have noticed, and people are recognizing that there are things we can do, and we're fortunate that better technologies have been coming along at just the same time as this recognition has hit. So, you know, I think we do have much more political will to move than we have seen in the past.
Well, great. Thank you so much for the time. Any last thoughts that you want to share? Or?
Well, I do want to give a shout out to your organization, because I think anyone who has followed the history of air pollution control in California understands that the strong political support that we have enjoyed over many years is matched by support that we've had from the civil society, as they call it in Europe. That is the groups that are not governmental, and that includes many smaller and middle-sized companies that play a role in developing advanced clean transportation systems. So I think it's a partnership that has stood us in good stead, and we're very grateful for it, and as I said before, looking forward to continuing it on into the future.
Well, thank you so much, Mary. And I do remember the days when you were on our early board and helped get us launched before your current position, and have enjoyed and welcomed working with you for so many years. Thank you for your time today.